Well, joining us now to talk about what we should expect is the Chief Deputy Whip, Congressman Peter Roskam, Republican from Illinois. Congressman, thank you so much for being here on In the Loop.
Thanks,
now,
Betty.
The key, of course, is getting enough Democrats on board. How do you convince the Democrats, the 40 or so that you need in order to pass this bill? How do you convince them to come on board?
Well, what you first got to do is convince them to shrug off bad advice from their leadership that is weighing in and actively saying to vote against this. And the reason is simple. This is the historic balanced budget amendment. Now, there was a version that was presented earlier that Democrats didn't like. We've now removed their objections, every stated objection from the debate several months ago, and now we've brought this version that came within one vote of passage. So we don't need a majority of Democrats. We don't even need half of the Democrats. We just need enough Democrats to shrug off really bad advice coming from their leadership.
Right, and I think one of them is Steny Hoyer, the Democratic whip, who has said, look, he just doesn't trust the Republicans to know what to do with the fiscal deficit. Some of the concerns, right, that he and some of the leadership have expressed is that they say, number one, if you try to force or if you try to pass a balanced budget amendment, it's going to force the economy into recession because it's going to force spending cuts, force tax increases. What's your response to that?
Well, look, it was good enough for Steny Hoyer in the mid-'90s to vote in favor of it. It was good enough for Jim Clyburn, the number 3 Democrat in the House, to vote in favor of it back then. The overwhelming majority of the public rejects their analysis. This polls in the 70 to 80% across all groups, Republicans, independents, even Democrats. And I would suggest that the minority whip listens to Peter DeFazio, congressman from Oregon, a Democrat, who has said, let's move forward on this. This is a historic opportunity. Let's not play partisan games, and I'm paraphrasing Congressman DeFazio, but most folks intuitively understand balance is the key here, and a balanced budget amendment is a thoughtful, forthright thing to do. Think about the buoyancy that would happen if the story tonight is House Republicans and House Democrats come together and pass a historic balanced budget amendment. It would be huge.
Of course, though, Congressman, I mean, you compare it to 1995 when, yes, in fact, Steny Hoyer did vote for this balanced budget amendment. But we're in a different situation in 2011, though, with the economy.
Oh, I agree with you. We're in a completely different situation, and we're in a different situation largely because there hasn't been a balanced budget amendment. If there had been a balanced budget amendment passed in the mid-'90s that had been enacted, we wouldn't be at $15 trillion in debt. We wouldn't be looking out over the European landscape and thinking, how can that we guard against that happening to us? We would be protected from that. So I think that with all seriousness, the Democratic leadership needs to say, look, we've got to shed these partisan games. We've got to recognize that the confidence of the country is really in jeopardy right now. Let's come together. The Republican leadership has removed all the stated objections of the last debate, and let's pass this. This shouldn't be about donkeys and elephants. This should be about gaining confidence and ultimately creating an environment where we're not in jeopardy of taking on another $15 trillion in debt.
Congressman, is the super committee talks, or are those talks hurting the chances for this amendment to pass?
No, I don't think so. I think they're on parallel tracks. Both the super committee instructions and the balanced budget amendment came out of the Budget Control Act, which was signed into law back in August. So I think these are on parallel tracks. They're related. Everybody wants the super committee to succeed and ultimately come up with something that can be presented to both the Senate and the House and enacted into law. But the balanced budget amendment is a debate that is separate and distinct, and ultimately the vote for it comes out of the decisions of the Budget Control Act back in August.
What are the chances, do you think, that we will come to a deal on the super committee?
Look, hope springs eternal. I'm not willing to close down any conceivable opportunity or any conceivable framework for discussion. So I think it's very important that the super committee press on and that those members recognize that the country is looking to them, if possible, to come up with a solution. Because ultimately, if the super committee isn't able to come up with something, the cuts are going to be put into place no matter what through sequestration. And that's not a particularly pleasant avenue for anybody, which is why sequestration was put in place in the first place.
Okay, Congressman, thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining me. Congressman Peter Roskam,
thanks, Betty.
Republican from Illinois.